Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I am here and I'm just going to have a little quick check and just make sure this is going live on my Facebook page before we get started. And yes, we are. So that's cool. So, hey, hello and welcome. For those of you I haven't met before, I'm Marilyn Devonish from transformationstm.com. And today we're having what I think is a really important conversation about race, racism and white privilege, and some of the stuff that I was just about to say going on in the world at the moment. It's been going on in the world for hundreds of years, but something has been a catalyst for this. For some reason, this conversation feels different. This time in the world feels different. And so I'm here with the fabulous Claire Brummel, who I am always quoting and always saying, hey, look, you need to, I've lost count, Claire, of the number of people I've said need to go and speak to you. So first of all, hello and welcome.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're most welcome. Now, so do you want to do a very quick, not quick, look, take as long as you like. Do you want to do an introduction in terms of who you are? First of all, just so people get a sense of, why we're even having this conversation, and then we'll go from there. So whatever you want to say as your introduction, go for it.
Sure. So who I am, I'm a coach and mentor. I developed a methodology and a program called the Universal Needs, which is all about understanding what our needs are, how to get them met, and how to get them consistently met in more effective ways. I think, though, in the context of this conversation, it's probably more important to say who I'm not as opposed to who I am. And that is, I am not an expert. I'm not an educator when it comes to anti-racism work. I am just a white woman who's doing her best to become a more decent human being by doing the work myself and sharing about it as it feels appropriate to do so. So I don't want anybody thinking that I'm an expert. There are lots of amazing experts out there. I'm not one of them. I'm just somebody who's doing her work on the path.
For me, I always say you really need to speak to Claire. You really need to see what Claire's saying, because it feels like you have become an expert at handling this conversation with a sense of grace. Because sometimes there are times where I think, I don't even know why Claire is doing this, because it is such a challenging conversation to have, particularly when you're having it online, because we know how crazy the keyboard warriors can be. And so that is one that has always really, really intrigued me. So I think what we might do, actually, let me just go here. I'm going to put the first question up is how and why did you get involved with this movement? Because of all the things you could be doing with your time, this is one that is really challenging.
Yeah. How and why did I get involved? So I guess my journey with this started a while ago. And if I'm going to be really vulnerable here, and I'm going to be really transparent here. So it really probably started for me several years ago. And I remember having a conversation with a white friend of mine who we speak on a weekly basis. And I remember having this realization that I did think, feel, respond differently to different people based on race. And I hated myself for it, because everything I'd learned about racism was that it was a bad thing. And if you were a good person, you weren't racist. And to even name that was unbearably uncomfortable. And it was only because I was with a trusted friend who I felt I could have the conversation with, and she and I have been having this conversation. So that's probably where it first began. But where it really kind of ramped up was when the Charlottesville Riots happened several years ago. And I was it brought it to the fore. And I'm somebody who, my own personal journey with my work, it's all done based on intuition. Like, I feel what the next piece of work is to do. And when that happened, I was like, oh, something's up. Like, there's something happening here. And even at that point, so only a couple of weeks after that, I actually was in Key West in Florida, and was when Hurricane Irma hit. And my life got turned upside down for a few months, to say the least. And being honest, I think it provided a good distraction for me to avoid doing the work. I did some research, and I read Layla Saad's article on I need to speak to spiritual white women about white supremacy. So I knew it was up. But really the main thing that was the catalyst was I had a very, very, very good friend of mine who is a Black woman who was starting to do her work of unpacking where systemic racism lived inside of her in a very public way. So she was sharing these things online, And I remember kind of going through this journey when kind of witnessing, and because she was someone I was really close to, it was in my face all the time. And I remember going through the internal dialogue of denial and irritation and anger and upset, but that's not me. Like I went through all of that. And then my real wake-up call, again, ashamed as I am to admit it, was I was actually, bless her, Shonda Rhimes, I was actually watching an episode of Grey's Anatomy. And spoiler alert in case anybody, it's from a while ago, so you've probably seen it. She did an episode where there was a young black boy, I think he was 14 years old, and he'd lost his keys and he was breaking into his own house and was shot by a cop by doing so. And in it, he died. But the thing that really got me, I mean, I was used to seeing injustice on television. Like, that didn't affect me the way that it really should have done, if I'm honest, because of the parallels with the real world. What affected me was there was a conversation that was had between a black couple who were parents and their 13-year-old son. And it was the talk they had to have about surviving an interaction with the police and how to stay safe, and how he couldn't do any of the things his white friends could do. And no matter how scared he was, and this is the thing that really kind of hit me, was no matter how scared he was, he could never, ever, ever run. And there was something in that. I mean, I still get emotional just thinking about it. And it was like something struck a geyser inside of me, and this grief came up and out. I was like, now's the time. I need to go into this. It had been in my field for a while. That was the moment where I really, it was the tipping point for me stepping in. And that was when I started to really do my research, look for courses, start to do my work on it. And then once you start doing this work, if you're really doing it, you can't not do it anymore. That's just from my personal experience.
Wow, seriously, I don't know why I'm getting emotional, because I haven't even seen the episode you're talking about. But what I am thinking about is Shonda Rhimes is a master storyteller. To knock out a hit show once that just grabs a diverse audience, well done. To do it twice, good job. Once you hit the third time, you're like, okay, there's something going on here, because I've watched some of her other shows and she nails it every single time. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen the one where the political version, where you've got Consider It Handled, and Olivia Pope is the main character.
Yes. Scandal, yes.
Absolutely. If you listen to the music that she plays in the background of Scandal, if you're not into music, it probably passes you by. If you're into music and you listen to the music that she plays with each of those scenes, she's telling a historical story, even with the music that she's playing. So I didn't expect the Shonda Rhimes to come up in this conversation, but she's one of my favorite storytellers, and she's doing something really powerful in a really subtle, yet if you're really watching, as you were, between the eyes. Now, I've got to ask you a question about that in terms of the denial, because one of the things I've noticed about this conversation, it's easy on both sides to go into denial, go into anger. That anger sometimes gets misdirected at the person who has brought this to your attention and raised the conversation. And then people, a lot of unfriending, a lot of blocking. And I know that's also happening in real life as well, where suddenly you're cutting someone out, you're cutting them off, whereas previously you would have considered them to be a really good friend. So what did you do, or was it just the nature of your gorgeous personality that didn't happen to you?
Oh no, it's happened to me. I mean, and I think this is the thing, is that I mean, thank you for the compliment of saying that I have a gorgeous personality. But I think that that's one of the most important things to learn about this piece of work, is that it doesn't matter how nice a person you are. It doesn't matter how much work you've done. It doesn't matter how good a coach you are. It doesn't matter. This system works in patterns, and it works inside of us in patterns, and it works in the world in patterns. And those patterns show up consistently. And so it doesn't matter how nice you are. I think I was very, I don't know whether it was intuitive. I don't know whether it was luck. I don't know what it is. I think there was something in me that stopped me from doing that out loud. Like when I was going through that process of the denial and the frustration and the white fragility responses basically that were going on, there was, I guess there maybe there was some sort of wisdom to say, like, this is your internal process, take it internal. And that's when I then went and learned from, I went and did courses to understand what was going on and to unpack that and begin to dismantle that process. But the thing for me is that I think that had I out loud gone through that process, the truth is I wouldn't have the friends I have now, because I went through it's this pattern or these patterns, the pattern of your awareness, even of this, like the denial, and then the frustration, and then the anger, and then this is all supposed to be in the past, isn't it? And then the oh well, hold on a second, maybe there's a little bit of a point, but come on, and then, oh crap, this is really something here, and then, oh no, I have to do this work, and then reluctantly doing the work, and then oh god, I don't want to get it wrong, and like there's like all these stages that the majority of people go through. Not everyone goes through all of them. It's not a linear thing, but I think that I was lucky enough to have the right people around me and to be exposed to the right things, and I learned a lot from seeing other people screw up. I learned a lot from seeing online where people were doing that thing, and I was listening to the responses, and I started to see the patterns. And as a result of that, I learned to keep, so we've got at the bottom of the screen, to listen more and speak less. Like I listened more and spoke less at the beginning of this journey. And that's the reason I still have the friends that I do today, because it was more of an internal process. And that anger and the resentment and all that stuff, that was all directed at me. It wasn't about anybody else. It was about what I was angry with, this thing that was inside of me. I was resentful of this system that was causing me to behave in these ways. It was my own complicity that I was actually angry about, but I just didn't know it at the time. And it's only through doing the work that I kind of got there. But I think that it's, nobody is immune from it. And it doesn't matter how nice you are. In fact, the nicer you are, often the more dangerous you are, because you'll slip in with lack of awareness, and you'll be just wanting to ask a question or just wanting to clarify, and then your fragility comes up and you end up just spewing white fragility all over the page or all over the post, which then causes harm. And it's as I said, I mean these patterns are they are in everybody. And even as somebody who's been doing this work for a very long time, I still have moments where those patterns come up, and I'm just lucky enough that I've done the work to be able to notice them, to then deal with it in order that I don't cause harm, because ultimately that's why, I mean, our whiteness is frequently weaponized. It's one of the most dangerous tools out there.
And in terms of the whole piece around the fragility, because I think that's a big part of it, there are times and I have to make decisions. There are times I go, not my conversation, because I'm just not close enough to the conversation to even, get involved in it. But I'm observing, I'm looking at it. This is going to be sort of like how long is a piece of string, but white fragility, how would somebody know they've even got it? What does it actually mean?
So, and again, I'm not an expert or an educator on this. This is based on my awareness. But white fragility, basically, if you're a white person, you have it. Like that's not even up for debate. And I'm aware I've probably triggered a lot of people's white fragility just by saying that, because it's like, oh no, not me. I'm one of the good ones. And I get it. And I would have been in that position myself not so long ago before I began doing this work. So white fragility it's basically, it's a phrase that was coined by a lady called Robin DiAngelo, who herself is a white woman. So I'm caveating what I'm sharing here by saying there are far more incredibly powerful educators on this topic even than her. It's frustrating right now that hers is actually the #1 book in the US on this topic, although there are lots of others, because people still are wanting to hear from the white woman. So I'm just kind of saying, just caveating that and saying there are plenty of other people to be listening to above and beyond her. But it's a phrase that she coined to describe the series of unconscious, that's the first thing. It's unconscious. It's not something you do consciously. You're not aware of the fact you're doing it. Series of defensive moves that are subconscious and unconscious plays out when we're faced with any kind of racial tension, because as white people, we've never had to really face it. We might have had the one-off incident. I can already hear people going, oh no, but I've been discriminated against. Yeah, okay. In terms of systemic racism, no, we haven't had to experience that, and we've never had to deal with it. And it's to do with when the status quo of systemic racism gets called out, or when somebody just operates differently to how we have been conditioned to expect it to work because of growing up in this culture. And what happens is that we don't have the capacity to deal with that tension when racial issues come up, because we've never had to, because the system is that we are the default, and that our comfort comes first, and that we're always right. And there's so many layers to the system. And so what happens is that when we're forced to feel any kind of racial tension, that's what the fragility is. We just, due to the lack of exposure to it, we can't cope with it. And so subconsciously, there's a series of defensive moves that come up that to try to diffuse the racial tension, but they're done so in a way that prioritizes us and costs the Black, Indigenous, Asian, or other people of color in the dynamic. So it perpetuates the same systemic racism, which prioritizes us and costs others. And that can look so many different ways. White fragility can look like somebody ignoring the conversation, leaving the conversation. It can look like somebody believing that simply naming their own inappropriate behavior is them being attacked, and going into, oh, I'm being attacked, poor me, centering themselves, centering their feelings. White tears are a big part of that. White women do this a lot, where it's like, oh no, I didn't mean to, I'm so sorry, like white guilt, all of those things that come up. The instances like it's being colloquially known as the dirty delete, which is when a white person on Facebook has made a comment on something, and then you have a lot of Black or other women of color, mainly women of color, that I'm seeing this happen with, but other folks of color, basically, that they're educating on the thread, and then the person who realizes that they're being called out, and they delete the whole thing, including all the labor and education that's been done by the other folks in that thread. I mean, it shows up in a multitude of different ways. It can just be denial. It can be excusing what you've done. I mean, there's so many examples, and these are all just these patterns that show up. And what they do is they seek to reinforce that status quo of inequity, which is favoring us, our comfort. And what it's doing is it's putting the social resources back to us, whether that's attention, space, time, priority, and it's taking them away from the folks of color within the conversation. And it's so dangerous, it's so harmful.
That's amazing. That is absolutely fantastic. That is such a clear description of what it is, and I've seen many of those play out. Even just for years, when I've been doing talks on diversity and racism and conflict resolution, I've been calling it, for probably nearly the last 20 years, the microaggressions. Yeah. Almost like death by 1,000 cuts, a bit here and a bit here. And that thing you say about being nice, people will often say, one of the things I've noticed, yes, but I've got lots of Black friends, or yes, but there are Black people in my family, or so it's almost like the yes, but, which in a therapeutic context, I'm always looking out for. And I've seen that's happened a lot as well, almost to then go, well, it can't be talking about me because, and then they'll just hold up. And they don't see it as the token friend or the token person, but that's sort of the way it plays out and comes across.
Yeah, there's a lot of and this is the thing, I think this is one of the most important things for us to get in this conversation, is that a lot of people, when we think about racism, we have an idea in our head, which is a socially constructed idea that a racist is somebody who knows they're doing it, is doing it intentionally, and is doing it because of their beliefs, and are doing it to somebody else because of the difference in the races. And that is something that exists in our culture, of course. the bigger issue here, and the most important one for us to address as a priority from what I'm being taught and from what I'm hearing and from what I'm learning myself, is systemic racism. And systemic racism is a system which consistently favors those of us who have racial privilege, i.e. those of us who have white privilege, and sometimes those who are white passing too, and consistently costs those who don't. And this shows up in every facet of life. And the thing is that when this is the air that we have been breathing our entire lives from the moment we were born, since before we were even born. All you need to do is look at the television, look at who's represented and who isn't represented and how they're represented. Where we've been taught our entire lives, both explicitly and implicitly, who has value, who doesn't, who's the normal, what's the default. When you go to the store and you get flesh-colored tights, or what color are Band-Aids, you look at, like, these messages we've been breathing them in our entire lives. So it's not a question of, are you racist or are you not? And that's what people make this conversation about. Is it, am I a racist or am I not a racist? And that's where those kind of conversations, those excuses kind of come. Oh no, I can't be racist because I've got a black friend, or I can't be racist because I'm a good person, or I can't be racist because I didn't mean to be. Like, all of those things, as soon as you start addressing it at the systemic level, that then it invalidates all of that. It doesn't matter. Those things are irrelevant, because we've been living and breathing this our entire lives. And because of that, it's impossible to have been raised in our culture and not have breathed in and not have the system of racism and inequity living inside your system. So it's not a question of, is it in me? It's a question of, where is it in me? And as soon as you can make that shift, it's not a question of, and that's one of the ways that whiteness protects itself. It distances and goes, oh no, it's not me. It's about those bad people over there in that country, not in my communities, not in my country, not in me. And what that does is it stops us from identifying where it is. And when we can actually say, it's in all of us, it doesn't make me a bad person. But what shows your moral character is, once you know that it's in all of us, what you then do about it. Do you actually go through the process of doing the work and dismantling it so you don't cause harm? Or do you say, oh no, that's too much like hard work for me, I'm not going to do anything because it doesn't affect me? That's where the moral character comes in, as opposed to, I'm a nice person, therefore I can't be racist.
And that's so interesting. I think one of I'm seeing a lot more of the Black people that I'm connected to speaking out about their experiences of racism right from childhood up until the present day. I've never seen that in the 9, 10, 11 years that I've been on Facebook. There are these people I've been friends with all that time. I mean, yeah, I've seen them share, the various posts as things happen. Trayvon Martin, you name it, those posts will get shared, they'll say a bit. This is the first time I've actually seen them sharing their personal experiences of what they've been through and what it's like. And I suspect that some of the reasons why you don't share that is the label that then comes flying my way, our way as Black people, is the angry Black woman is a stereotype that gets bandied about. And so you can't even raise it, even if you try to raise it calmly or, you do it passionately, immediately now that comes back. And you also have people go, oh, well, you're calling me a racist, are you? And it's like, no, I'm just trying to explain what it feels like on this side of the fence. I see you doing a
oh yes, it's something I've seen over and over again, and the thing is that the challenge is that white people generally don't realize is that our privilege, it acts as a barrier that prevents us from seeing systemic racism. And because as a race, we've always been taught that we're the default, we're like, again, value, we're better, superior, we know more, blah, blah, blah. But all of these intrinsic messages, not that we've necessarily, some people have got them explicitly, but these messages that we've received, we believe that if we can't see it, it can't exist. If we don't know it, it doesn't exist. And so what ends up happening is that because of how it shows up, I always describe it like privilege is like a blind spot in a car. It's like, that there's a spot in a car that you cannot see unless you look for it, but we've never been taught to look for it. We don't even know it's there. So we drive through life and we're just sideswiping people left and right, because we don't see that it's there. It doesn't stop those people from being there. It doesn't stop the harm that is done to those people from our ignorance of those blind spots. And that's the thing, is that when we have these conversations, a lot of white folks, I mean, I'm seeing it now, the shock of, what do you mean this can't be real? And it's like, yes, this is. We've just not been paying attention. We've not been listening. People have been trying to get our attention for a long time and tell us what the lived reality is. But when people are sharing their lived reality, we're denying it, we're ignoring it, we're dismissing it, we're trying to explain it away in a multitude of different ways. And that's just because we can't see it. But once you start to look for it, when you start to be taught how to see it, it's beyond horrifying. Like, you cannot. And the thing is, I get it. I've been looking for it for a long time. We will never understand it. Doesn't matter how much you try, doesn't matter how much you learn. I know I will never fully understand what that is, which is why we need to be talking less and listening more, because the only way we will really understand is by listening to the people who know more about it than we ever will. And until we learn that we don't know, and that there's so much that we have to understand that we have no concept of, we're going to act as the biggest barriers to the progress that we all desperately need.
And for people watching, I'm just going to give you a couple of examples to build on what Claire has said. And this is a conversation I had with a lovely friend of mine who's out in America. She was out in London, and we were thinking of going to the V&A to see a particular exhibition. And and it's about memorabilia and history and all the rest of it. I says, look, when I was growing up, all of the superheroes were white. The baddies were always black. When I was growing up and reading the Peter and Jane books and the pirate books and all the rest of it, all of the good people were white. All of the black people were baddies. There was a book called Anansi, the Spider-Man, but Anansi was, of course, a black spider. He was always naughty, always getting into trouble, always doing bad things. When I was growing up, all of the pretty dolls were white. There might be the odd black doll, which was probably a ton more money as well. So it was easier to get the cheaper white ones. So, and I say to people this, and it just reinforces all around you in terms of all of the TV programs. The black person, I remember listening to Whoopi Goldberg. It was a really emotional speech. She said she remembers the day. She remembers the day there was a black woman on television who wasn't a maid. And she ran through the house shouting, come see, there's a black woman on TV and she's not a maid. And that one incident planted the seed in Whoopi Goldberg's mind that she too could be an actress. But until that point, she had seen no representation. Same with Nichols, who was in Star Trek, allegedly I know there was an interracial kiss before that, but they were the first big interracial kiss on TV with her and Captain James T. Kirk. And she wanted to leave the series, and it was Dr. Martin Luther King who begged her not to leave. He says, you do not realize what you being on that show in a position of responsibility, you're on the bridge, you're not there just for yourself, you are there for all of us. So basically what he was saying is she is now creating another role model that people can look at and see, oh, she's not cleaning the ship, she's not serving the food, she's on the bridge. And so, and again, it just sounds weird now. I mean, Black Panther, the Wakanda Forever, when that came out, that for a whole generation of children has now created a role model that did not exist in my lifetime.
Absolutely.
They were, so if people haven't realized, I just say, think back to your childhood. What were the books? What were the toys? What were the TV shows? And even all of that, it just silently reinforces the whole idea that Claire has been kind of talking about and sharing here. So just very briefly before we move on, have you seen the video with the children and the dolls? I think that
which one's
pretty.
Yes.
Tell people about it.
So there's a video. There was an experiment that was done. I don't remember when it was first done. It was repeated in Italy, I think, maybe 10 years ago. And what they did was they had a whole group of children, and these were children of all different races. And they had a white doll and they had a black doll. And they were asking them, like, which doll was the good doll? And all of the children, no matter their race, pointed to the white doll. Which doll was the naughty doll? The black doll was highlighted. Which was the pretty doll? The white one was highlighted. Which was the ugly doll? The black one. And they went through these series of questions, and it was consistent. I mean, odd exceptions, but consistently the white doll. And at this age, these children had already internalized these ideas, no matter their race. And there's a heartbreaking moment when this, I think it's a little girl she's been asked which is the ugly doll. And she's pointed to the black doll, and then she's asked, which is the doll that looks like you? And you can see the internal turmoil because she's realizing that's the one that's me. And it's creating this self-image. It's not just about the image we have of others. And that's what I think a lot of people don't get, is that when I say everybody has absorbed this, everybody's absorbed this. But the difference is that we've benefited from this system. So we have a responsibility to do something about it, because it's not impacting us in the same way as it's impacting others. And that's our responsibility to change, because we have the social resources to be able to do so because of the benefits the system has given us. And it's actually in our interest to do so as well, but that's at a much more subtle level. We do have a responsibility here.
Claire, I can hear the yes, but as you said that statement, I can hear people going, yes, but I haven't benefited. I haven't got much money. I'm living a difficult life. I've struggled. I've been attacked, or I've been abused. So they're going to come and say, no, show me how I've benefited from this. What would you say to that?
So I hear this a lot when we start talking about privilege, especially when it comes to the monetary thing. A lot of people are like, oh, I've not had privilege. I grew up with nothing. And the thing you have to realize about white privilege is it's not telling you that your life was easy. All it's saying is that you didn't have the color of your skin making it harder. That's it. It means it was easier than somebody else who was in exactly the same situation that you were, but had a different color skin. And that's the thing, is that we don't realize the multitude of ways that the system has benefited us. And it's not necessarily about, we maybe didn't know to have somebody individually come up and speak to us personally and go, oh, here, I'm going to give you this benefit. But when you just look at simple things, there was a bunch of research done in the UK a few years ago about names on resumes, and if you had a foreign sounding name, you got called back for interview at a significantly lower rate than a white sounding name. When you go in, and the unconscious bias that we're talking about, we were just sharing about, it affects how you view somebody's capacities, abilities, I was reading a Twitter thread this morning about a white man who used to manage a group of people, and he managed 2 black people, and the ways in which he was told to manage them differently by the people above him were horrifying. But it's all of these, and you talked about the microaggressions, it's this myriad of small things that you don't necessarily notice, you don't necessarily realize as you're walking about life. And the thing is that it's a little bit, we all don't necessarily notice the extent to which we have been favored or penalized. There's actually a slightly parallel thing. There's a transgender woman called Paula Williams who's done a few amazing TED Talks, and she has lived as a white male, and she's also lived as a white female, and she shares in her TED Talk that men can never truly know how much the odds are stacked in their favor because they've never walked on the other side. Conversely, she said women don't actually understand just how much it's stacked against them because they've never seen the other experience. And I think the same is true when it comes to racial inequity as well. I think that often, because it's part of normal life for all of us, we don't see it even when we start looking for it. And as somebody who's been looking at it for years, I'm still seeing so much that it can still happen in front of my eyes and I don't necessarily notice it. So it's important for us to recognize that privilege doesn't mean to say you had it easy. It just means to say that your skin color didn't make it harder.
And that's what I always say to people, you know, when I appear walk into a room, walk up the street, the first thing you will see about me, and it's about the Dr. Martin Luther King thing, judge someone by the character, content of the character, not by the color of their skin. That's the one thing you're going to see about me first. I'm black, and I also now happen to have dreadlocks. There's no getting away from that, and that in and of itself will put a perception in some people's minds, even if they're not aware of it. And I did an interview, a friend of mine, and we might come back to this one as well, just going to plant the seed about being scared of what to say, not wanting to get it wrong. Some of you might know Nick James from Expert Empires, got a message from him a couple of Sundays ago saying, can I have a chat with you? I've got a couple of questions to ask. It's about race, it's about racism. What is it like to be in this industry in terms of personal development, public speaking as a black person? So I did a panel interview with him and a few others a week and a half ago. And I just shared a couple of examples, but even when I just share one of the examples, people are like, oh, they can't even believe that. But one of them was my first day out as a management consultant. So, I've done my Prince 2 project management training. I'm a management consultant. I've got a business studies degree. I've got a postgraduate marketing diploma. I've got the raft of personal development skills. I'm a facilitator. I'd say I'm a pretty good one in terms of the feedback that I've had. And I'm sat in HM Treasury, Horse Guards Road, suited and booted, very expensive shoes, Prada shoes, a leather attaché case that sent me back the best part of £400. So I looked the part, and I'm sat in reception. I'm waiting at Treasury because it's a secure building. You can't just wander in and go where you want. Person comes to collect you, and people come and they collect their guests and off they go. And I'm just sitting, not really thinking about anything in particular. Just noticed a guy came down. He just spoke to someone. And then he turned to walk back to reception, and suddenly I realized he'd spoken to every single, so he knew I was a woman. We'd spoken on the phone, but we'd never met. He'd spoken to every single woman in reception. And as I looked around, I realized all of those women were white. It didn't even occur to him for a second that the facilitator and trainer who was coming in to design the leadership development training for him would have been a black woman. So he was going back to reception to say, did you say? And so at that point, when I suddenly all the pieces clicked, I called his name out loud. He turned around, looked in the direction of where the voice had come from. And then I said, oh, are you da 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 da? The look of horror on his face, because in that moment, he realized what had happened. He knows that I know. Now, somebody else sitting around who was white probably would go, oh, you're making a big deal about it. It's, they try and what I call black-splain it away as a number of factors. But I knew in that moment exactly what had happened. And it was my very first time this is in 2003. And I was crushed. I was like, oh my God. And because the deputy prime minister of the time had just walked past me, and I think I'd seen the lead economist, and I'm like, what am I doing here? Black woman from South London, with all these people who've been to Oxford and Cambridge, and there's little old me. And thankfully, I've got what I call my other brain. So when I'm in the elevator, they've got a lovely glass elevator. As I'm going up in the elevator, my other brain is having a serious talk with me about the fact, yes, he may be, and you probably have a very similar education. I just didn't go to the same establishment. But the fact of the matter is, you are here because there's something that he has not been able to do with his team. He has not been able to get them to work together effectively, cohesively, efficiently as a team. You have the skill to do that. So remind yourself of that and get in there and do a fine job, do an incredible job, blow them away. That's your work. But seriously, it all happened going up in the elevator. But somebody else, just generally speaking, who could have observed that scenario, just wouldn't have thought anything of it. But for me, it was a defining moment. And thankfully, I didn't let it crush me, because if I had done, I wouldn't have lasted till now as a management consultant. I would have just probably bowed out of the game and said, actually, do you know what? My face doesn't fit. It's not for me.
Absolutely.
So it's a really weird one. So I want to know, because this is like, it's like a pressure cooker in there, Claire. And that's why I always take my hat off to you. I'm like, oh my gosh, Claire, I can't even think. So one of the things I'm really interested to know is personally, and you don't have to, you decide what you want to share, but how do you cope with the emotions and the feelings and the volatility of what gets stirred up during these conversations?
Well, the good thing is I'm happy to share anything. I'm an open book. So I've got no qualms whatsoever about sharing my experience on this.
Just to say, I'm going to be looking weird now.
Yeah,
I'm going to be looking at the comments over there, but I'm totally listening. Carry on.
That's all good. You weird away. It's no problem. So for me personally, I think there's a couple of things. The first thing is that it's actually part of the reason when I first started, obviously I was doing my needs work and then I've been doing this work, and the two felt like they were pulling in different directions. And I kind of asked, I'm like, come on, there's got to be a link here somewhere. And one of the things that really struck me was that when I did my very first course on dismantling white privilege, I was somebody who I would wade in, I'd get overwhelmed, and I'd check out. That was my pattern when I first started doing this, because I'm someone, I go deep, and I got deep and I would overwhelm, and then I would check out, recover, and come back. And one of the first facilitators I ever worked with, a lady called Abigail Rose Clark, who happened to be a white woman, she was facilitating, but the experts on the program I was doing were all Black and other women of color. She said to me, the most amazing question, she said, how can you increase your capacity to be with the discomfort so you can stay in the conversation? And previously I was like, how do I decrease my recovery time so I can get back? And it really was a defining moment for me of like, how do I increase the capacity to be with the discomfort? And I didn't know at the time, but interestingly, that was how my needs work dovetailed in, was that actually by understanding what my needs are, understanding when a need is not being met, because at any time those emotions coming up, there's a need not being met somewhere in it, I can then look at that and go, right, how do I meet that need for myself? Because every time I do that, I increase my capacity to be with that discomfort. So I use my own work on the needs to be able to, when those things come up, process it. That's the beauty, and probably the reason I'm able to stay in this work is now I can hold very deep and very wide a large spectrum of emotions. So it doesn't matter where someone goes, I've got the capacity to hold it. And then the other thing is I also have other white folks who are doing this work where I can go and process with them. So we can process with each other in a way that we can do it away from our emotions. Because the thing is, we have to feel it. If we're not feeling it, if we're just doing it as an intellectual exercise, we're not doing the work. It has to feel, it has to be felt. We have to feel the consequences. We have to feel the anger and the shame and the grief and all of the things that come up, because otherwise we're trying to intellectualize something, which is what whiteness does, is it makes it all a brain thing. And one of the things that I realized was that when I began doing this work, and actually in that first program, was that when I first started, I was very much in white savior mode. I was coming in and I was doing my duty and I was going to do the things. But what I realized partway through that first course was that the system of white supremacy had actually stolen from me aspects of my basic humanity without me even realizing it, because they robbed me the ability to see the humanity in others. And so by doing this work, I got to start to see those tiny little pieces of my humanity coming home again. You can only do that if you feel it. So you have to allow yourself to feel it and have your emotional experience. So you are actually processing it at an emotional level, not just an intellectual one, because that's when you're really doing the work. But we need to do that away from the folks we're going to harm, because our emotions aren't actually the most important thing. Shocking though this is to a lot of white people, because we're used to being prioritized. It's the least important thing. Our comfort, our feelings. What matters is the feelings and comfort and needs of the people who are being systemically cost by this system. So we need to go and deal with that for ourselves, because that's part of us taking care of ourselves, so we can stay resourced to stay in this dialogue and continue even when it's tough. But we need to do that away from a place where we may cause harm.
And that's so interesting, because I've seen a lot of Black people saying they are actually having to step away from this conversation, because not only are they having to deal with their own feelings of watching basically what are public lynchings in broad daylight on social media, they're also then having to help and coach and manage and almost try to make better the feelings of the white people that they're having conversations with when they're having a bit of an emotional fallout. So it's almost been like a double whammy for me. And I've seen many saying, I can't even have these conversations anymore. One of my friends put it that it's damaging to her psyche.
Yeah.
And I get that. I understand what they mean by that. So, and I think you and Paddy Honan are now connected. So just,
we are.
Paddy has said white fragility is a resistance to acknowledging white privilege, which in turn is privilege based on your skin color, not that you don't have any privilege. So, and in terms of what you were sharing earlier, James Goodhue had said, so true. We've got Red Mercury. I like that name. Science is dominated by white fragility. They deny it even exists. They even demand empirical evidence of it. And it's do you know what, I think he makes a brilliant point. And sometimes when I just share, like, you know, when I share the example of a client turning up probably in around about 2002/3, she was really uncomfortable at the start of the breakthrough session. Now, I know a breakthrough session is uncomfortable by its very nature. You are coming for a day to have a massive breakthrough and totally change and transform your life. And that means going where you're talking about, into your feelings. What are the things that are in the deepest, darkest recesses? What are the things in your blind spot? What's the shadow? But I knew within that 15-20 minutes we started, but there's something else going on here. This goes beyond this is nothing to do with this. So I then said to her, about half an hour in, I said, is there anything you need to say, or is there anything we need to discuss before we get into doing the full work of the breakthrough session? And she says, well, yes, actually. And this was back in the days where I did have a website, but my picture wasn't on the website. And there was no social media. I know, hard to believe that was even at my time. And she said, yeah, actually, she said, my dad is racist. My mum is very racist. And I guess I'm racist. So if I'd known you were black, I wouldn't have booked the session. My response to her, because when I say people, oh my God, my response to her is, I said, thank you so much for sharing, and thank you so much for being honest and open. I said, at this late stage, ordinarily, having booked the whole day and I normally wouldn't give a refund, but I said, we've got a couple of choices here. I said, I can either give you a full refund, no harm, no foul, or option number 2 is you're here now. You've come all the way to Watford. This was before I was doing online sessions. We can stay and do the work. She went for door number 2 and stayed and did the work. And somebody was saying, well, how could you work with her after she said that? I said, I'm delighted she said that. For me, on this subject, better out than in, because it's that insidious stuff, the stuff that is beneath the surface that you have no awareness of, which for me is almost more dangerous in some respects than somebody being right in your face and telling you exactly what they think. So this was in the summer. I do the breakthrough session, off she goes, have a nice life. A Christmas card arrives in the December. I don't recognize the handwriting. So, oh, who's this from? So I open it, and the first thing I do with a card, if I don't recognize, I look to the right-hand corner, because normally that's where you signed your name. So I look at the right-hand corner. Now I'm still confused, and then I notice there's a big essay on the left. So I now start reading the essay, and it's from this woman, this client. She's saying, you know, I'm no longer bulimic. I'm no longer anorexic. I've stopped self-harming. I've stopped doing drink. I've stopped the drink. I've stopped the drugs. I'm back at university. I'm making good grades. Marilyn, I just want to say thank you for changing and saving my life. In that moment, I actually had to take a seat, and it was like, oh my goodness, if I, number one, had let her statement overcome me and just went, okay, then here's your money. She, you know, all the stuff that has happened in her life, but also if she hadn't been brave enough to speak those words to me and to just lay it on the table, and then, like yourself, say, I'm here, let's just do the work. I'm not saying she would have ended, but she was in a bad way when she came. It was her parents who forced her into it because they were so worried about her. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And that's planting the seed for all the diversity and conflict resolution work I do. She is a major catalyst. It planted the seed that anything is possible when you can get another human being to sit down and, like you're saying, shut up for a few minutes, and we just have a conversation. So it was a game changer. So I'm always saying to people, look, it's not about not talking about race. The thing about it is, have the conversation, but be prepared to listen on both sides, because we all bring our prejudices to the table, and we've got to be a little bit more forgiving sometimes in terms of how that craziness, shows up. So it's an interesting one. Hold on. And so James, also there's a statement there that's a stunner of a point, that I might posture that racism is 95% subconscious, just like the rest of life. Well, Claire's nodding, James.
It affects everything. It literally does affect everything.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I wouldn't use the term crazy because it's an ableist term, but I think that there's this idea with this that we, I don't know whether you've ever heard of standpoint theory. There's a viewpoint that the more privileged that you are, therefore the more likely it is that you're going to have better knowledge, better awareness, better capacity to solve the problem. And this is the thing, is that this perception is that those who have racial privilege, class privilege, sexuality privilege, you think about the people who are at the top of Oxford and Cambridge, and you're going to get a lot of white votes, you're going to get a lot of wealthy white men. And standpoint theory, because the more privilege you have, the less you are able to see these systems. Standpoint theory posits that those who have the least privilege actually can see problems and situations more clearly, because they can see more of the things that those of us with more privilege can't, which means that when we are looking for the answers and the solutions, and obviously there are exceptions in it, so it's not that this is a kind of blanket rule, but the more privilege we have, the less easy it is for us to be part of the solution. And people will talk about diversity and equity workshops where, like, an hour into the conversation, you'll get a white guy rolling his sleeves up with a white marker for the whiteboard going, right, how do we fix this? And it's like, you don't even understand the problem yet. And that's part of the challenge, is we think we have the capacity to understand it, when in actual fact we can't. So if we want to be part of the solution, we need to dedicate ourselves to understanding the problem and our part in it, and then listen to those who know more about it than we do on what the solution could look like and what our role in that could be.
Absolutely. I'm just looking at the one from Hash Jama here, and it's a longer piece, but what you can see on the screen, he says, I agree with everything discussed. It's most certainly an experience shared by Black people and other people of color. It's even more sinister having a Muslim name on top of that, with suspicion and portrayal of terrorists, different and by the baddies. And then it says, my concern now as a business, they all jump on the Black Lives Matter support, which we have seen in some previous occasions, to no benefit other than purely as a statement. How do we ensure things change on a systemic level, and also from a legislative perspective, in particular through the work environment and through the recruitment process, as Claire has just touched upon, which I can 100% attest to. And I won't say her name on camera because she's talked about it publicly on Facebook, but I don't know how open her page is. A Black friend of mine was having real trouble applying for a job, like you and Hass were talking about here. She actually changed the name on her CV to an English sounding name, got an interview. Now she's on Facebook going, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? I've got an interview. They're expecting clearly someone white to turn up, because she'd been rejected from the same things with her Black and Nigerian sounding name. And now she's got the interview and she's like, do I cut? At some point in the interview, you're gonna have to come clean and go, well, actually, that's not my name. But her dilemma, having just proven the point, was what do you do about it? So Claire, is there anything else you want to add to that in terms of, and what, seriously, I have to just come back to one thing you said. Well, when you said it, I almost had to sit back in my chair when you said, yeah, the course I did, the work, I'm like, Claire's done courses on this. You have done workshops on this. That is amazing. Absolutely amazing.
I guess the thing is that I think it seems amazing because comparatively with the majority of other people, that's not what they would be prepared to do. But here's the thing. We don't know how to deal with this unless we do the work. And doing the work is simply nothing more than learning about how to become a decent human being. The decent human being we view ourselves as, because it's common human decency to treat people with equity. It is common human decency to view them as human beings and treat them the way that we would want to be treated in the way we treat others. And this is the thing, the bar is so, excuse me, but freaking low for white folks that actually dedicating time and money and resources and all these things to learning how to not do that is viewed as amazing. That, to me, is indicative of the situation that we're in right now. It's like, and this is not meant meant to, I'm not meaning to be any criticism of what you just said. It's like, let's look at it as it is. Like, this is about a system that has benefited me consistently my entire life and has penalized others. And it's a system that is killing people. It's not just the people who are dying out on the street. This is about a systemic, there's an amazing TED talk by a guy called, I think his name is David Williams, called How Racism is Making Us Sick. And he talks about how it's affecting every aspect of our lives, how Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s, his body, when they did the post-mortem, what his body was like on the inside from having to deal with this his entire life. And when you look at how access to medical care, quality of medical care, access to financial support, I mean, it literally, when I say it's killing people, that was one of the biggest revelations to me when I did the first course on this, was I thought it's killing people is like people being killed by police in the street. No, this is happening at a much more systemic level. Life expectancy is lower. I mean, you need to look at it and understand this is something that we have responsibility for. And taking that responsibility and doing something with it is seen as amazing. When in actual fact, and I get acknowledgement all the time from friends of color who are like, oh my God, you're so amazing. It's so good to someone who gets it. And I'm like, oh my God, the bar is so low that actually listening when a Black or other person of color is speaking to me, believing them, backing them up and showing solidarity is seen as amazing. That in and of itself should tell you about the state that we're in as a culture and as a society. And as I said, it's my responsibility. If you really are doing the work, how can you not carry on? How can you not keep having the conversations? How can you not keep moving things forward? And it's not amazing. It's decency. And we need to readjust the bar where we are acknowledging effort. And it's like, it's okay to quietly, humbly acknowledge the effort you're putting in or that somebody else is putting in. I have friends who are doing the work who reflect that to me, and I'm grateful for that. But really, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that amazing, and we have a long way to go. So until more of us take this seriously and start doing this work, really doing the work, and showing up and being willing to invest ourselves and our time and our resources into this. I noticed that one of the things that Patty said on here about that we shouldn't impose on the emotional labour or the educational labour on Black folk to give us the education we need to do the work, or they should pay them for their time if they wish to. And he's saying get paid more, and I completely agree. Like, these are things that we should be paying for, because again, the system has benefited us and it's cost somebody else, but we expect them to pay, to teach us for free. And even when I'm having these conversations, I'm having a lot of these conversations with white folks, as you can imagine. I take donations for a charity that supports Black communities, because I want them to be investing something of themselves into this work, and those communities are the ones that need to be benefiting from us dismantling this. So I just want to say there's a lot of celebrations. I've actually written a post on this that will be coming out in the next week about all of the back patting and celebration, especially for performative stuff. And actually going back to what Hass was saying about they're saying the token gestures to the Black Lives Matter movement. How can we change it at a systemic level? When you see people making those gestures, go and look at what their board looks like. Call them out on that. Say it's not enough to just say Black Lives Matter. You have to actually invest your time, energy, and you have to use the privilege you have to be a part of redressing this inequity in our system. And saying Black Lives Matter is not enough. We need to be actually acting and putting our energy into creating something that is different, and that has to happen at a systemic, meaningful level in terms of policies and practices and legal and the legality of our or the social justice system, which is not social justice, sorry, criminal justice system. We need to be addressing it at this level. And the way that we as white folk we need to keep talking. You can see the news cycle starting to wane, and there's less people sharing about it. There's less people posting about it. We need to keep it front and center of everybody's minds until there is meaningful systemic change.
And I won't call out the name of the fashion brand, but there was one who put the black square up when it was that Tuesday. a couple of people did exactly what you said. Because they're a fashion brand, they went and they looked at their fashion shows for the previous 5 years. Now they did a number of shows. If they subscribe to the 4 shows per season, that's a lot of shows. In all of the shows in the 5 years, there were 2 of the shows that had a black model. So people quite rightly went in on that. And I'm like, do you know what? I'm really pleased about it. And other people did. They went and looked at the boards of some of these companies. Now, let me just get this clear. I'm not a fan of tokenism for the sake of tokenism. You want someone who is capable of doing the job. However, if you're not even looking at black people, it's never going to happen. And I remember the days of Naomi Campbell and Tyra Banks, where if one of them got a runway show, the other one knew they were out, because you can only have one black model. And I saw an interview, it was probably 4 or 5 years old now, with Naomi Campbell, but even talking about it 4 or 5 years ago, where she was still speaking out about there not being enough representation, it's like, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. So yeah, you're absolutely right. The talking about it, saying it is one thing, but the actual then, I guess, putting your money where your mouth is and investing in that conversation is really, really important. Paddy, I love you, Paddy. He's brilliant. And also we had Sandra who made a very interesting point. She says, oh my God, I've also done the name swap experiment. No interview with my African surname, but got a call back when I dropped it for an English name. And I know there are parents who will purposely, in this day and age, name their child and maybe put the African, Nigerian, the Caribbean sounding name in the middle, so that their children, they just try and take the edge off, you know, what they know they will particularly be facing. So it's a really interesting one. We also have the lovely Rachel CK, who says, hello, ladies. And she has started, and I think she's corresponded on a couple of your comments and threads. She's started to have this conversation and is at the stage where you were describing in the beginning, where you're just going, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. This has been happening all around me and I didn't even realize. And I always say to people, look, why would you have realized? It makes sense. I'm not upset that you haven't realized, because why would you? It's not your world. It's not your paradigm. So you just wouldn't notice these things because they're not even on your radar. So
the thing is, we did notice, because if you ask anybody if they wanted to be a black person in this country or a white person, nobody is going to say they wanted to be a black. And that's because at some level we knew. We might not have realized the extent of it. And we have to own that. We have to say, I knew and I didn't do anything about it. That's part of the process. It's part of the healing. We have to own our part in this in order to be a part of creating something different. And if we're saying, oh no, I didn't know anything, we're actually kidding ourselves. And we have to be honest with ourselves in order to be a part of actually moving this forward. And we have to go beyond the performative. We can't just say these things. We have to be doing the deep, honest reflections of going inside and going, what's really true? Like, is it really true? How do I really feel? What really comes up for me? And we have to look at that honestly. Otherwise, we're never going to make progress. Because if we don't make progress, honest progress in ourselves, how can we hold those accountable in the wider system for it?
Absolutely. And there is that wonderful piece, and I've put, I've said it's an oldie but a goodie, that the Racism Resources blog that I put together. I'll cycle back and I'll put the link to the blog in the comments of the chat and in the description. But I showed a video from Jane Elliott, who's been a pioneer for as long as I've been studying psychology. And I started studying that when I was, 17, 18 years old. And she does an experiment where she has an auditorium full of people and she says, stand up if you would be happy and like to be treated the way that black people are treated in our society. And it's of course a room full of white. They always just sit down. She says, maybe you didn't understand the question, or maybe you did. And the reason you're not standing up is you know exactly what's happening and you're just choosing to kind of, look the other way. So Jane Elliott, if you've never watched her videos, get on it. The woman has been around since the 1980s, probably way before that, but that's when she came onto my radar. She was on the Oprah Winfrey Show and she did the blue eyes, brown eyes experiment, which is basically like the thing with the dolls, but she brought it to life. And the people with the blue eyes on that first day were treated like queens and kings. And the people with the brown eyes were less than. And then she flipped it. And the people with the brown eyes were treated like royalty. And the people with the blue eyes were treated like crap. Man, they were upset. They felt it deeply. And so it's, you know, it's a really interesting one. Now, Claire, I'm just looking at, God, where does the time go? I just want to ask, do you have anything else you want to say on the white privilege? You've described it beautifully. Is there anything else you wanted to put into the mix on that particular topic?
It's a privilege to learn about racism rather than experience it.
If I was Oprah, I'd say that was a tweetable moment.
And that's not my words. I've seen it shared as a meme innumerable times over the last, I don't know who the quote is, so don't kind of quote me on that. But it is a privilege to learn about it rather than experience it.
Wow. Thank you. And that's really, I'd say that is a powerful statement. So for you, what have been some of your biggest learnings and biggest insights? You know, sometimes you don't have to completely reinvent the wheel, although this, I think, is one of those topics where you benefit, not you, but the wider world benefits from actually jumping in, doing the work, having the experiences, living the experiences, sitting with people, being present, feeling it rather than trying to shortcut it and go, well, that's a great quote, or I've read that book, I'm all right now. So it's not about, oh, well, just listen to Claire's learnings and her insights and now you're okay. But is there anything you want to share with people that for you have maybe been pivotal, or when you share it with people, it kind of either opens them up or rocks their world or has some kind of deeper impact?
Yeah, there's a few things. The first is that when I first started doing this work, that it felt like I was stood on one foot in the middle of a room that was covered in mouse traps, and if I even moved or breathed, I was going to set off a mousetrap, and it wasn't going to hurt me; it was going to hurt somebody else. And I was terrified of moving for fear of hurting somebody. But then I realized that not learning how to move and how to start dismantling those mouse traps meant that at any point someone else was going to barrel through and those people were still going to get hurt anyway. So it was my responsibility to learn how to move, how to start dismantling the mouse traps, how to make mistakes, because you're going to make mistakes, and how to move through that. One of the biggest revelations for me, I have two very, very, very close friends of color. One is a Black woman. One's who's in the Netherlands. Another is she's an Asian woman from. She was born and raised in the UK. Her lineage is from Bangladesh originally, and the three of us have been doing this work in parallel. In the sense we've not done it together, but we've each of us has been doing this kind of dismantling the systems of racism inside of us, and it's looked very different for all three of us. But I realized we met for coffee early last year, and there was this beautiful moment where, because obviously this was the topic of the conversation because we've all been doing the work, we were talking about it and everything. And at one point, my Black friend turned to me and she said, like, are you okay? Like, I'm really aware that it's your people that we're talking, because obviously we were talking about white folks and our general ignorance and what we need to do. And I was like, I love you so deeply for the fact that that's your humanity caring about my humanity, but we need to be willing to have these conversations. And the conversation turned into this moment where I remember her sharing how, because I've done this work, barely scratched the surface. It's going to be a lifelong journey, because I've been in the process of doing this work, that I can actually see her for the first time ever. I've never been able to see her in her entirety and in her experience. And not only that, but she can trust me because she knows she can share her experience with me, and I will believe her and I will listen and I will do what I can to support her. And the depth of connection and bond that exists between me and these friends now, I had never experienced before, because to have somebody, my whiteness can be weaponized at the blink of an eye. Like in the moment, all it takes is for somebody to not be paying attention and to say something based on their original conditioning, not on what we've learned. It's so dangerous to be in relationship with us, because it's so easy for us to cause harm. And to have somebody trust me because of the work I'm doing, and to say that they feel like I can see them now, and the bond that's created as a result of that is the most beautiful relationship I've ever had, because it's required real courage and real trust. And it's trust I have to continue to prove. And it's not because she's saying, in fact, we had a conversation last year, which I hope you don't feel like you have to keep proving yourself. I'm like, actually, I do, because it's easy to retreat back into the patterns of whiteness. If I don't keep showing up and keep doing this work, I wouldn't trust me. So I have to continue to show up, and I have to continue to do the work. But what I get as a result of that is breathtaking. And there is no other experience like it. But I think that in terms of, so that's been on a very personal level, something that I never expected to get as a result of doing this work. There's all the kind of standard stuff I can share, but that's something very personal that the trust I have a number of clients of colour, and I remember one of them who's very, very active in anti-racism work, and we had a conversation a few months back, and she was like, I feel like I need to share something, and I'm like, it's entirely up to you. You're welcome to share whatever you want. And she was like, it feels incredibly unsafe sharing this with a white woman. And I was like, thank you. Like, oh my goodness, thank you for sharing that with me. And because she was able to share her experience and I was able to hear it, we've created a deeper working relationship than I have with a lot of my clients as well, because we've had to traverse this, the rift that white privilege has put between us. And it's taken courage and effort on both sides to create that. So these relationships I have now are so beautiful and so powerful. In terms of the more kind of practical side of things, I've said it numerous times, listen more than you talk.
Just coming up on the screen now again.
Just coming up on the screen now again, listen more than you talk. But I really think that there are three really important things with this. The first is, obviously I've talked about racism versus systemic racism, that we have to get that out of, so that we can get out of this idea that it being a good person or our intentions make any difference, that we actually are recognizing it's in all of us. Just accept that it is, and then you can start looking for it. It is not our fault. Like, we inherited this system every bit as much as everybody else who's speaking to it, but it is our responsibility because we've benefited from it, we're complicit in it, and we have more social resources as a result of it to actually change it. So I'm not saying it's my fault this system exists, but it is my responsibility to change it. And then when it comes to where to start in terms of educating yourself on this reality, the most important thing that for me was, the biggest thing was learning. Start by learning what you do when you get it wrong, because you're going to. It's not an if, it's a when. Start by giving yourself understanding, what is it that I do when I screw up and when I cause harm, and therefore how can I, because if you have somewhere to go and some things that you know to do when you are in that situation, it makes going into that situation a little less scary. So when you're in that mousetraps room, like, if you know, if I set up a mousetrap, here are the things I need to do to address that. It doesn't make setting off a mousetrap any more enjoyable, but it means that you're a little less afraid of doing it because you know what to do when you're in that situation. So the first thing is to know what it is that you do when you get it wrong. The second thing is white fragility, is understanding, because that's the biggest block to us actually listening and actually learning and actually being a part of changing this. So starting to learn about your white fragility and dismantling where that pattern of behavior is inside of you. The most important thing, go and seek out the real experts, the real educators. There are so many incredible women of color, especially Black women, who are teaching about this. Pay them, go and learn from them, because they will teach you in a way that I simply cannot. I can put my own experience sometimes into words that people can hear, which is why I speak out. But I'm not the expert. There is so much wisdom out there, and go into it with this belief. Start from the place of you know nothing, because if you're white, chances are you don't. Even if you've been studying it for years, you still really know nothing in the grand scheme of things. Respect the wisdom that is there. honor it, value it, and go and learn from them.
And what you've said about the whole thing about that sense of connection, I remember once years ago, probably around 2005, 6, something like that. When I'm working in corporations, I'm a leadership development trainer, weirdly a flexible working implementation consultant about how to transition into working from home online. I've been doing that since 2003. And as a result of being in and running just a regular leadership development training, there was a council estate in London who were at war. The police were at war with the gangs. The residents were caught in the middle, but also hated the gangs. And so they're at a standoff. So they're having this big council meeting with the police and the ASBO team and social services and everyone. And then somebody in the meeting apparently says, I think there's a woman you should call. Her name is Marilyn Devonish. And they went, So I get this random call saying, right, this is the situation. A gang member was killed on the estate. The police, while standing over his body, apparently made some derogatory remarks along the lines of, well, you got what you deserved because you shouldn't have been on the stolen moped anyway. The residents were there, agreed with that sentiment. So it's like a tinderbox now. And then the kicker was we had 4 hours to bring these people together for the first time ever. And it was that volatile that the police had said, we're not coming into the meeting. And I said, oh, yes, you are. So my job, but my end result from that, when I was commissioned to do the work, I said, by the end of this day, this half day, this 4 hours, we're going to be breaking bread. And I saw a vision in my mind. I saw it as clearly as I can see you in front of me. We get to the end of the workshop where at first the police didn't even want to step into the room. And there was a defining moment where I knew I'd done it. I knew we'd done it. I knew that it had happened. The gang members said, we're coming on the proviso that we show the video we've made, which was a tribute video to their friend. And I still get emotional when I think about it. And they'd done a montage with music, rap music in the background. So it comes to the moment now where I explain to the audience, the police and the residents and the council, that we're going to show this video. It's a tribute to the friend who had unfortunately died. Played the video. It ends. There's like silence. That's uncomfortable silence. Even right there, somebody might be watching go, is she frozen? It was about 5 or 6 seconds. And I'm making my way back up to the podium and I'm like, oh, what does this mean? And then one of the residents went, and then it started a Mexican wave. And then another of the residents said, that was lovely. Can we see that again? And that is when I knew. And I'd also say, because food is a really powerful, I had said, if you have food from your culture, or if you just like to cook, can you please bring some food? Because there's no budget, surprise, surprise. And we're in a church hall, like a, village hall sort of thing. And so at the end of it, I'm walking around after the meeting because I put them all into groups and I made them work together. And I did some things that foster that, very quick human connection. I'm walking through the room and there's a little white woman who's 4 foot nothing, a gang member who's black, who's 6 foot something. They're both holding a plate of food. She's looking up at him. He's looking down at her and she's saying, as I walk past, I knew your mother growing up. She was so lovely. And you've turned into such a lovely young man. I'm like, that right there is like, that's a code. This was the day before I had a camera attached to me. That's a Kodak moment. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And not only that, I found out months later, as a result of that one tiny meeting, that one facilitation, they went on to work together because I got them to do a list of what needs to happen on the estate for things to change, like biggest learnings, insights, etc. They took that list and as a collective, they looked at the skills they had. Like the young guys, the gang members were strong, they were agile, they could climb. So they went and fixed all the lights, they put up hanging baskets. The older white residents who had green fingers, they loved tending it. They transformed the estate. One meeting, 4 hours, one crazy facilitator who didn't listen to the police and said, it's going to be fine. I need you in that room. Here's why. And so I know that anything is possible when you can get people to come together long enough to do exactly what you've been kind of sharing here as well. So Claire, have we got a time for me to put a few of these comments? Because I know you've got a busy Thursday. Have we got time to flash a few of these comments?
We do. I've still got some time.
Brilliant. So here we go. So it's Has Jama says, good insights and experience. Glad we can keep the conversation going because this is where the real work happens when the proverbial circus has left town.
Yeah, very much so.
So true. And if there's anything you want to comment or an add as I put the statements up, feel free. Let's see. We have James said, Jane Elliott, a white educationalist and activist, will teach us all what we need to understand about how racism works. She's a master.
Yeah, it's interesting actually also seeing the word activist, because it was really interesting when you shared about the fact that we were going live today. I don't remember the word you actually used to describe me, and I was like, oh, really? Like,
I see you as an activist.
This is the thing is, though, again, this is another thing we have to recognize as white people. We don't get to put these labels on ourselves. It's like the same thing with the word ally. A lot of people, ally is not a label, it's a practice. An activist, it's not a label, it's a practice. And all we get to do is practice it. If somebody else gives us that label because that's how they see us, i.e. somebody from the community that we're standing in solidarity with, that's their right to do so. But I see a lot of white people like identifying themselves as like allies. It's like, no, that's not your label to give. It's your practice to do. Same thing with activism. It's a practice to do. Leave the labeling to somebody else, because the only reason someone's providing you with that label is because you've consistently showed up in that way. The second you stop doing it, the label stops becoming relevant. So it's like the practice is more important than the label.
And you have been showing up in this work for years. I'm just like, oh my goodness. As I said, so Paddy says Dr. Tiffany Jana is the expert. So that's one for everyone to go and look up, go and do a Google search. And Paddy loves, he's quick with the old finger. So Paddy, if you have a link that you want to put into a thread, put it in there. I'll also add it to the resources blog as well. And the reason I created the resources blog is I found that I was repeating myself over and over again. And I don't worry, I like having the conversation, but where there's something I could say, rather than say, well, there's this video by Jane Elliott, it's like, or there's this Harvard student who, when she was going to Harvard, she went to the post office and everybody kept saying on the way, which Harvard, you can just go and read that blog for yourself without me having to keep sort of saying the word.
I don't know whether I've sent you, I've got a link to a Google Doc of resources that I'm adding to. I'll ping it over to you.
No, you sent it to me. It's on the blog. I'm blown away. That's a resource and a half. It's like a library.
Well, and there is actually a library embedded in that somebody else has put together. But it is that thing of like, people are always asking me, where do I start, or what can I read? And I just like, every time it's like, here, start there. Find the one that resonates with you to start with, do that, and then work the next way through. So I'm absolutely just checking you had it.
No, you sent it to me. It was straight on there. It's brilliant. JJ says, lovely. Thank you, Marilyn, for creating the opportunity for people to come together and get a little understanding about each other. Well done. Well, Jay, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Claire, for being willing to have this conversation. Because I sort of think about, it's not a good term considering what's happened in the United States, but it does feel a bit like you put yourself in the firing line, because this is volatile, emotive stuff. This is, religion, politics, that can get your blood boiling. This comes down to the core of who we are as human beings on almost a fundamental level. So thank you for being willing to have the conversation, Claire.
You're very welcome. When I said it's our responsibility, and this is like one of the other things that it's important for us to remember. This is a white people problem. It's a problem that was created by white people for white people, perpetuated by white people, and white people have benefited from it. So it's actually our responsibility to keep the conversation going. Like it's all very well saying, well, it's a little uncomfortable, or I don't want to get involved, and I don't like conflict. We don't have that's not our right anymore, because this is something that it's our responsibility to address this. And so we need to keep having the conversations. And as long as people, I don't go out creating these. Like, people come to me, they want me to be a part of the conversation because I think there's something I can share that's of help. I'm more than happy to do so. But we need to keep using our voices to keep this front and center.
And one of the things you said earlier is like, well, it was in the past. It's happened so long ago. And a few weeks ago, I did a webinar. You can't see all the words, but put it this way, there's a lot of them. Because I'm not going to keep re-triggering people, but it was about healing, clearing ancestral trauma. So we did an energy clearing webinar. This is the slide where I basically just took some of the words off social media and put them into the slide. And then we did some HUNA, access consciousness, energy clearing work to move those out of people's systems, because that's what they were feeling. But this version, it just took me, I just thought, I'm going to spend one morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. I thought, let me just spend 15 minutes going through social media just to see how people are describing how they feel about what had just happened with George Floyd and everything that's going on. Anger, frustration, exhausted, numb, traumatized, sadness, hopeless, heavy, fearful, fragile, ignored, race, injustice, inequality, guilt, waste, no value. Those are from Black people and white people. Now you can guess the ones that were mainly written by Black people in terms of being ignored, etc. That took me 15 minutes to come up with those words, what I call a word salad. 15 minutes.
Yeah.
That's what people were describing in terms of how they felt. Thank you, Rachel. Rachel says, as ever, weaving hope. I do my best, Rachel. I do my best. Let's see. Now, there was something here. Oh, thank you, Paddy. Paddy says, well done, ladies. Thank you, Paddy. There was something that I saw. Right, this one. So, hey, Neelam, thank you. Neelam has also been heavily in this conversation for many decades, I'm sure, in terms of the work that she does in terms of government as well. But she said Jane Elliott from 1968, straight after Martin Luther King's death. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do that webinar, and it was an open webinar, it was completely free of charge. And yeah, Paddy, I do know I need to get paid. I hear you, and it's on my radar as well. One of the reasons I did the webinar is I know what a toll this can take in the moment, when something happens and fresh and new. And from my therapeutic work, because I've been a coach and therapist for the last 20 years, I know that even if you don't believe it and can't prove it in terms of science, in terms of ancestrally and genealogically, even if you were not there 400 years ago, 500 years ago, I believe that some of the trauma of that can get carried into our timeline, almost feel as though it's encoded into our DNA. So what you said about Dr. Martin Luther King, I felt like one of my favorite memes. There's a little black girl that goes, she's on a sofa. When you said about looking at his organs internally, I was like, that is a side of it I've actually not heard about before. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
Well, as I said, it's when there's so many different layers to it. I mean, you and I are both aware of what can happen energetically when somebody is subject to emotional trauma, what that can physically do to the body. And when you think about, you described it as the same thing I describe it as, like the microaggressions, like the death of a million paper cuts. Like when you're consistently experiencing all those little traumas, it's going to have an impact on the body. When you then add that to the as I said, access to healthcare, the quality of healthcare. I mean, even down to one of my closest friends, she has to take her white husband with her when she goes to the doctor because she will not get the same treatment if she goes on her own. The only time she took her son, because it was an accident, he'd had an emergency, he'd fallen over, and I think he'd hurt his arm. The only time she took him on her own, because she had to, she got accused of child abuse when her white husband was not with her. And when you look at the rates of pregnancy and childbirth mortality rate for Black women versus white, Black women are 5 times more likely to die in pregnancy and in labour in the UK than their white counterparts. So when you start looking at it at a systemic level, when you look at that intergenerational trauma that you're talking about, then you're looking at the microaggressions of just simply existing in this society. Then you're looking at the systemic and institutional racism of how of access to housing or healthcare or financial support. It's an assault on so many dimensions, and that's what the thing for me was, that recognition of people dying from this. This is not just the people who we can see on our front covers of our newspapers. It's actually much more insidious and it's much more widespread than we're aware of. So we need to take that seriously.
Absolutely, but I'm going to go and see if I can find anything else about the autopsy, because I'd be interested to know. But I think, I'm always talking, I did a breakthrough session, but just before we came online, we're working through releasing anger, sadness, fear, guilt, anxiety, and limiting beliefs. And one of the things I talked about, I said there is a potential that your organs, liver, kidneys, and etc., the way they process emotions, if you're not moving that through the system, out of the system, it can come back. And then that's a whole different, anyone's interested in Gert Hamer, the mind-body connection, how illness can show up in the body, how stress can show. And people will, you know, oh, I've got the weight of the world on my shoulders, and they get neck ache and backache, or the anger, they've got stuff going on with their liver. You know, so we already intellectually know this. I think as kind of Black people, people of color, we probably carry a level of trauma that doesn't mean you have to have had a traumatic experience. Just by being alive and seeing all these things going on, it's fine. And Paddy's saying, sorry for going so hard with the comments, but just one last one. In order for it not to become a polarized, hate-filled environment, we must focus on what we are trying to bring about, work on behavior change, and what is within our control. Absolutely. Let's see.
Just thinking about the autopsy, I've got a feeling, I actually think it's in that TED Talk, the How Racism is Making Us Sick one. And I think that what he said was that he was in his 40s when he was killed. And I think he had the organs of, I think it was somebody in his 60s. So it was like, that was the extent of the impact of just being in this space consistently. I've got a feeling it's in that TED Talk.
Wow. Well, when I find it, the TED Talk will be going on the resources blog, because I think that sounds absolutely amazing. And Paddy says there is a place for process and validity for anger, but eventually we must turn our focus onto changing behavior and creating a system that reinforces change. And Neelam says, recognize that it doesn't stop or change higher up the system that Black people get. It becomes harder to raise the issues because of the expectations of following the rules, collective or management responsibility, and the white privilege let me just move over here, is often accompanied by status or money and privilege at those levels. And Neelam, my uncle Jeff Crawford was part of the very first police complaints authority in the United Kingdom in the 1980s. He passed away many years ago. Now, I was the chair for the at the Barbados High Commission for the annual Barbados Independence Day debate. They have an annual debate, so every year Tyrone Roach chooses a topic and we discuss it, and I'm the chair and the moderator, and we have, you know, speakers and educators from around the world. On one of those occasions, someone who was very high up in the police force, has the MBE, OBE, was, you know, rose through the ranks. I said to him, if Uncle Jeff, where's my uncle? So if Uncle Jeff were alive today, what do you think he would make of and say about the progress we've made? His response to me, having risen to as high as you could go and been honored by the Queen, he said, many of us broke through the glass ceiling only to realize it was reinforced with concrete. When he said those words, it's like my heart sank. I was like, after all these years, that's heartbreaking. So Neelam, exactly what you're saying there. And that's not going to be the case for everyone. Claire and I are not making blanket statements, but this is the majority. And it's exactly, Neelam, the point that you're making there. Very sad, but you know, true. So Claire, as we bring this wonderful conversation to a close, is there anything, number one, please let people know how they can find out more about you, also with the Meeting Your Needs work, because I think that's really powerful and important for people to know about. So let us know where we can find out more about you, you know, websites, email, etc. And then also be thinking in the background, any closing thoughts that you wanted to add.
Well, if you want to get in touch with me, obviously you can. I'm tagged in this on Facebook. If you want to find more about the universal needs, and I think that the thing that I found from the universal needs perspective was, as I said, it helped me increase my capacity where I hold privilege to stay in the work of dismantling it. When I actually started to look at male privilege where I didn't hold privilege, it helped me to stay more resourced with simply coping with an unjust system. So I think that that's the thing I found, and that's the feedback I've had as well from other people, is it's supportive for both sides. As somebody who's been dismantling privilege where I hold it and where I don't, it's actually been supportive on both sides. So you can find that via the universalneeds.com. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. I'm more active on Facebook than anywhere else. So if you want to find me, that's where to find me. Final thoughts. Truthfully, my final thoughts are I should be not giving the final thoughts on this matter. Of the two of us, and this is what I said to Marilyn at the beginning, is that I'm recognizing that you wanted to interview me to get my my experience and my perspective. But it was interesting when Marilyn first messaged me about doing this. Well, not first messaged me, but recently messaged me, and she said, "Oh, I think I'd like to do it on perspectives." And I said, "That's going to be really interesting, because my perspective on this is that my perspective actually is irrelevant, because the only perspective that really matters is how I can support." As one of my dearest Black friends says, she describes it as me collecting my people. Like, how can I help other white folks understand this? How can I support them on the dismantling so we can be part of collective change? But my perspective as Claire doesn't really matter. What matters is the perspective of people like Marilyn and those who this is their lived experience. So we need to be listening to them. And so personally, from my perspective, the final words are probably best and would serve most coming from you.
Okay, and also with regard, and seriously, for people who are watching this as a replay, please read the comments, because there are some fantastic comments that are showing up here. We haven't got time to go, because I don't have a Claire here all day, but please go. Oh, interesting. Oh, okay. And seriously, and I've seen little inklings of that one as well, in terms of the delays and not doing what they want to do. So that's definitely one saying he did not die from the assassination tape. It was revealed that he died because a redneck doctor cleared everyone out of the examination room and refused to give him the appropriate medical attention. So please go forth and read those comments. So in terms of my final words, and I would be saying, look, if people are saying, how can you support? I've been saying it for years, but in a completely different context. I've been saying, and I normally talk about it in terms of entrepreneurs and business owners, if they're doing work that you enjoy, that you benefit from, or that has benefited you, share what they're doing. If you have a few words to say about it, just hitting the share button, that's really nice. But sometimes people don't know if you've just done a mindless share because it's just there and you've hit share. But if you've experienced it, say something. Great workshop, wonderful talk, brilliant facilitator, lovely ideas. Just say something, because social proof is so important. And one of the things that many of us know in terms of being Black is that oftentimes we are not afforded the same platforms. We only can come in by the back door or the side door. Because like you're saying with your friend with the white husband, who when she goes for medical treatment, often we don't get in the door unless there's a white sponsor, somebody to let us in. So I would say, make those recommendations. If you know someone who's good for a part, if you know someone who's good for the role, if you know someone who's good for the job, if you know someone of color who's Black, who's doing great work, please support them. And even if you can't buy from them, share their information, because the likelihood is you are connected to someone who can. And when you add those all important words, great resource. I've got a few of my, what I call my champions. I'm not going to call them out now, because if I say a few names and I miss someone out, person I miss out is going to be upset. But hopefully my champions know who they are, who always share and just add a few words into the mix as well. And also, don't assume that people know who you're talking about. Please, I can now hear, I think it's Destiny's Child, say my name, but speak their name. Say the name of the person you're recommending, so that we can go and find their books, we can go and find their TED Talks. So like Claire, every time you've mentioned something, the name is right there, which I think is fantastic. And I also want to say thank you to everyone for being part of this conversation, because even to sit here and listen, at various points, you might have had to sat with your discomfort and your feelings of, oh my gosh, that's not me, but maybe what it, and you'll be at various stages on the journey. But I would say, for me, Claire is an example of the fact that you're not going to implode or explode by being in this conversation and doing this work. And the net result of that, I think, is even deepened human connection, and just a more rich and joyful and wonderful experience of life. So I would say, keep the conversation going, not because you're trying to rake up the past, but from my perspective, because we want to heal the past. And I'm of the opinion that in order to resolve the past, it's not about we just look the other way. We need to go back and look at the root cause. The same thing I'd do if I was doing a therapeutic intervention or a breakthrough session is exactly how I handle this when I'm in, corporations doing this work. So I think we need to do that and address these issues, and then be willing to sometimes have things come up, because we all, regardless of your color, your race, your religion, your sexuality, we've all got our blind spots, we've all got our prejudices, we've all got things that we have been told growing up, maybe about the other side. And I think when we're willing to look at all of that, the world, and I'm ever hopeful, just in terms of the work that I've done on race, diversity, with gangs, etc., to see those transformations happen before my eyes, often in record time. That's one of the reasons why I remain optimistic about the hopes for the human race. So I think those will be my final words.
Well said.
Thank you, Claire. And just for those who weren't listening at the back, can you please say your website again?
Oh, theuniversalneeds.com.
universalneeds.com. And for those of you, you guys know where to find me. If you want to drop me an email, it's Marilyn, Marilyn, at transformationstm.com. Trance is TRANCE. Formations, F for Freddy, so FORMATIONS. My therapy website is www.transformationstm.com. There is now a link to the flexible working, remote working website as well. That's a whole different conversation. The worst way to get hold of me, why it's grayed out, is to ring me. My phone has been off the whole time that I've been talking to Claire. It's off when I'm coaching. It's off when I'm creating webinars. So it's probably easier to drop me an email. On social media, it's / Marilyn Devonish, and Devonish is DEV for Victor, ONISH. Apart from Instagram, which is a NeuroSuccess coach. Claire, and in terms of your social media handles, what are they for you? Are you Claire Brummel? And do you want to actually, can you spell your name as well, please?
Yes. So Claire Brummel is, you can throw as many letters as you can. So CLAIRE, and then my surname is Brummel, BRUMM for Mike, ELL for Lima, and the best way to get hold of me is probably via Facebook. I have a page for me as an individual, and I also have a page for the Universal Needs, and same thing with Instagram. So just find me whichever way works for you. But also, if anybody wants, there are any white folks going, oh God, I'm lost, help, and they just want to point in the right direction, please feel free to reach out, and I will gladly point you in the direction of some resources that could be helpful.
Wonderful. I'm sorry, I'm giggling here. Rachel CK, the oily queen, and the bath butler have had this conversation so many times where people have actually actively said to me, you're my best kept secret and you're my secret weapon. So what if that means they come, they do incredible work, they get amazing transformations, whether that's physically, emotionally, financially, etc. They don't actually tell anyone. They do mean it as a compliment. However, I'm having to say, can we stop that now, please? Because in order for me to thrive and survive, people need to know who I am, they need to know the work that I'm doing, and they need to be making those recommendations, because everyone assumes that I'm okay and I don't need it because, oh, your work is so brilliant, so this. And I'm like, actually, no, the more that continues, I will not be here to serve anyone, because I can't survive on praise alone. And I think that's a big part of the Black community, where it's a whole other conversation to say how the culture has been appropriated. But Black people actually don't get paid for that appropriation, but they were the core creators of it. So thank you, Rachel, for that. It's an interesting one. So wonderful, brilliant. Claire, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I don't want to scare you, but I feel a workshop or a webinar coming on.
Long may the conversation continue in whatever form, and and if I can be of service, I'm happy to. I love that Jay's put in universaltransformations.com.
We like that.
We do.
Oh, that is brilliant. That is absolutely fair. And the comments, and I'm just really, it's been lovely. And I'm hoping, haven't had any angry comments in here. Everybody has been wonderful and just sharing. And that's really, and for me, that's the energy, when you can keep that energy going, just being open to listen and hear the other person. And if you realize then you've been overly defensive, actually go back and even apologize and say, okay, I get the point you were wanting to make. It's powerful. So Claire, thank you. I'm going to end this broadcast now. I have a minute or so chat with Claire, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for all of you. Thank you for the wonderful comments. Thank you for the interactions. I really appreciate it. And I'm wishing you all an incredible rest of your day, week, month, year, and life. And please, let's keep this conversation going. with the outlook of creating change, creating transformation. And I would love the change to come in my lifetime and also for the future generations. Let's not wait for a few generations. I say let's do it now. Thank you, Claire.